I think that it is very, very important to continue encouraging our governments and ourselves that the environment is not really an issue for tomorrow. The environment is an everyday issue. It's the air we breathe. It's the water we drink. It's the food we eat. And we can't live without these things.
During the 20th century, a young woman's campaign against the Kenyan government encouraged the conservation of African forests and advocated for peace, the rights of women, and democracy. Her name was Wangari Maathai, and her vision would guide Kenya towards a better future and improve the environment and quality of life in Africa forever. Wangari Maathai was born in the rural village of Nyeri, Kenya, to a tenant farmer and his wife. When she was only 7 years old, her older brother convinced their parents to allow her to attend school even though education for girls was not valued. Eventually, Maathai's success in her studies earned her a scholarship to Benedictine College in the United States. Before Maathai left for the States, the environment in Kenya was very green and the indigenous forests remained untouched. However, since Kenya was a British colony, the British government began to cut down trees in the forested mountain areas of Kenya in order to establish commercial plantations of exotic species of trees. The deforestation of the mountains also damaged rivers. Heavy losses of trees caused rainwater to run downstream into lakes and oceans rather than through the underground reservoirs, thus drying up the rivers. When Maathai returned to Kenya, she found that her country had not only lost its beauty but had fallen victim to an oppressive regime. Although Kenya had gained its independence from Great Britain in 1963, the government had become determined to repress democracy and any other changes in the country. The government also disregarded the conditions of the environment. When Maathai became a chairperson of the National Council of Women, women from all over Kenya came to Maathai explaining their problems obtaining water due to dried out water sources. Many also had to walk miles in order to get firewood for fuel. Maathai took matters into her own hands and founded the Greenbelt movement on Earth Day in 1977 with the goal of ending the environmental degradation that had been raging on in Kenya for years. With this goal came another, to inspire women to fight not only for the environment but for their fundamental rights.
That she saw care of the earth as a very important part of her life, and care of the earth was linked to care of people.
At the early stages of the Greenbelt movement, 70% of farmers were women. The crux of the movement was encouraging farmers to plant greenbelts, or lines of trees, to restore the soil and natural resources. To help poorer women and to motivate others to participate, the Greenbelt movement compensated women with a small fee of money for every tree that survived for more than 3 months. Women would then spread the message of planting trees to their neighbors, thus starting a chain reaction. Maathai also wanted women to understand that it is a basic human right to have a healthy environment. For that reason, the Greenbelt movement educated women by creating a program called the Civic and Environmental Education. Although most of the women were illiterate and had not received an elementary education, Maathai's program allowed them to gain a better understanding of the environment and their accountability for protecting it. As she once said, you cannot protect the environment unless you empower people. You inform them and you help them understand that these resources are their own and that they must protect them. Maathai's ability to unite women and empower them to take on responsibility for their earth led to major changes in Kenyan villages. Women, who were expected to be submissive and naive, felt pride in their accomplishments because they were doing good things for nature and themselves. There were more trees and water due to the influx of trees as well as an increase in diversity in the animal and plant species. However, even though the Greenbelt movement was planting millions of trees, it wasn't enough to instill the environment's security. As women began to comprehend the importance of rehabilitating their soil, they also began to realize that their tyrannical government wasn't doing its job of protecting the forests. To Maathai, planting a tree was not only an action, but a symbol of democratic change. President Daniel Arap Moi's single-party rule was brutally against the idea of change, which was the basis of the Greenbelt movement. They fought the movement because of Maathai's never-ending attempts to empower the people of Kenya to change the government.
People in power did not like her, so she protested, she was beaten, she was jailed, all this stuff happened to Wangari Maathai.
In 1989, Maathai led a group of women in a peaceful protest against Moi at Uhuru Park in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. The government was planning to demolish the park and replace it with a 62-story business complex. Maathai saw the park as a green area for people of all ages to enjoy. Unfortunately, Moi did not agree with this sentiment. Nevertheless, the people of Kenya stood with Maathai. Many supported her campaign. Newspapers and journalists who were seeking greater press freedom went against Moi and covered the story. When the protesters took the case to court, they argued that the park belonged to the people, therefore privatization would be unjust. Although they lost the case, Maathai had rallied enough public support for the funders of the demolition project to pull out their investment of the project. Uhuru Park was here to stay. The movement was victorious. Because of the events at Uhuru Park, Maathai had become a target of the government, but this would not stop her campaign for democracy. In the 1990s, Moi began to face national and international pressure to reinstate multi-party elections. Eventually, the government agreed to this policy. Seeing this as a positive step forward, a group of Kenyan mothers led by Maathai demanded the release of their sons who were being held as political prisoners. At a publicized meeting in February 1992 with Attorney General Amos Waiko, they demanded the release of their sons, democracy, and freedom of speech. When Waiko only promised to look into the matter, Maathai and the mothers staged a hunger strike in Uhuru Park, the same park that Maathai had protested in only a few years earlier. Many people stood in support of the mothers. On March 3rd, the government attempted to end the protests with violence. Police forces beat and tear-gassed the women. In response to this, the women took off their clothes and shouted, "We shall die with our children." The violent attempt at repression caused the women to gain international support, including the support of groups dedicated to re-establishing democracy. After denying its use of excessive force, Kenya's government was criticized for its abuse of human rights. Eventually, the political prisoners were released and the mothers were reunited with their sons by January 1993. Later, in 1999, Maathai faced another hardship regarding the environment. Maathai led a group of about 20 members of the Greenbelt movement in protest of the government's intention to sell parts of Karura Forest to real estate developers. While planting trees, the protesters were attacked by security guards. The police made no effort to intervene, claiming that the security guards were supported by the government. Maathai was the first to be attacked and was beaten with a club to the head.
First thing she did was ask to see the press. She wanted to tell her side of the story.
Today, because of the efforts of Maathai, Karura Forest is protected by the government. What started as a campaign for environmental conservation had become something more. Every day, she was gaining support for her simple message of planting trees.
That she was a doer, okay? She wasn't a person that merely protested. She planted trees. I mean, she planted thousands and thousands of trees. She was the most peaceful person I'd ever met, where she was not bitter. She was so optimistic about life and about the future. It's incredible.
I call upon Wangari Maathai.
Her efforts won her the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004, resulting in her becoming the first African woman and environmentalist to be awarded with this honor. Maathai's Greenbelt movement transformed into a symbol of democracy and hope for the Kenyan people. As of today, it has planted over 51 million trees and has empowered women across the world to unite and fight for the environment, reaffirming the belief that a healthy environment and improved human rights should come hand in hand. Today, Kenya is on the road to a better future. The government is still flawed and the country still has a long way to go before it can truly have a healthy democracy, but because of leaders like Maathai, the people of Kenya's voices can be heard. Wangari Maathai once said, "You can make a lot of speeches, but the real thing is when you dig a hole, plant a tree, give it water, and make it survive. That's what makes the difference." She certainly proved her point with her countless efforts against the oppressive Arap Moi regime. By creating the Greenbelt movement and refusing to back down, even after being constantly beaten and ridiculed, her actions taught people to fight for their rights in the name of democracy. By advocating for peace and environmental stability, Wangari Maathai planted the seeds of hope into the minds of the Kenyan people, proving that a simple idea can start a revolution.